Welcome to this third of 6 videos in our series, I Am Because You Are. We're exploring equality and diversity in our Baptist life together, and this video explores the meaning of some of the terms that we are using.
After all, what is equality and diversity? Let's start with definitions from wider society. The Trade Union Congress says on its website that equality is about ensuring everybody has an equal opportunity and is not treated differently or discriminated against because of their characteristics. Whereas diversity is about taking account of the differences between people and groups of people and placing a positive value on those differences. Just take a few seconds to absorb those two sentences. They are very useful in working definitions, and elsewhere in this resource, we will reflect on them from the perspective of the Bible and theology.
There is, of course, legislation about equality, the Equality Act of 2010. And we can't explore this fully here, but it may help if we all have a measure of knowledge about the legal obligations upon churches and employers. It's unlawful to discriminate against another person on the basis of their age, sex, disability, race, religion or belief, sexual orientation, marriage or civil partnership status, pregnancy or maternity, or gender reassignment. And these are called the 9 protected characteristics. For example, refusing to interview a candidate for the role of church administrator on the basis of their sex would be illegal. Or if it would be shown that a church had voted not to appoint a minister on the basis of their colour, this too would be illegal. And we sincerely hope that these examples are uncontroversial. Now, there's a narrow range of exceptions for churches and other religious bodies in some circumstances, but note the emphasis, it's narrow. For example, churches may restrict membership to those who are Christian in order to comply with the purpose of the church. Exceptions exist such that churches may, in limited circumstances, deny certain people membership, participation in their activities, the use of any services they provide, the use of their premises or staff and ministerial positions. And the reasons for allowing these exceptions are often nuanced. To look into this legal area further, we recommend you follow this link off our equality and diversity web pages.
In any case, as those who believe in the fundamental dignity of all people, made in the image of God, we want to go above and beyond what is simply legal. We want to be part of a Christian communities that are known for their generous welcome, their encouragement of people, whoever they may be. We won't need persuading that no one should be treated unfairly and that no one should be harassed because of who they are. And yet this does happen, often, without our meaning it to. And that's because of our unconscious bias. Simply put, unconscious bias is when we make judgments without knowing we're doing it. It means we unfairly favor those who are more like us and distance those who are not. It means we judge one person based on our experience of another person whom we perceive to share similar characteristics. It means we can disadvantage whole people groups because of the way they are portrayed in the media or popular culture.
The Royal Society expands on unconscious bias a little. It says that unconscious bias is when we are unaware that we are making judgments or decisions on the basis of our prior experience or our own personal deep-seated thought patterns, assumptions, or interpretations. The irony is that prejudice and discrimination are inevitable byproducts of the efficiency of human cognition. The Royal Society makes the point that unconscious bias is universal and quite natural. In fact, it's how we get through each day. Our minds are wired to make rapid judgments based on experience, assumptions, and cultural conditioning, without taking the time to analyze each decision. So a harmless example would be if you're in a shop and you see someone wearing a uniform with that shop's logo on. You unconsciously assume that they know where you might find what you're looking for. So unconscious bias is natural. But where it comes to dealing fairly with people unlike ourselves, it can become hugely problematic. For example, because of our unconscious bias, we sometimes unwittingly exclude those who do not fit a prescribed mold from positions of responsibility. We overlook them in the provision of care. The majority in our community might deal with them superficially. We make assumptions about them and try to justify why they may not play a full part in our community life.
So we're going to hear now from some of the people across the Baptist movement. Welcome, it's so good for you to be here today. Would like to start by you introducing yourselves.
Hi, I'm Hayley and I'm one of the regional ministers in the Northern Baptist Association.
Hi, I'm Rhaea and I'm a member of the John Bunyan Baptist Church.
Hi, I'm Clare Hooper and I'm the Children's Youth and Families Roundtable Facilitator.
Hi, I'm Martin. I'm Baptist minister and disability theologian.
So we've brought you together from across a section of people within Baptist Together. And I'd like for us for a moment to look at the younger generation that's coming through at the moment. Do you think that younger people in your churches are more aware of prejudice and discrimination in church life than older members and leaders? And if so, why? Hayley, shall we start with you?
Yeah, thank you. I think younger people are more aware of those prejudices that we have as we've grown up in a very different educational system. So we were taught a very different way of viewing history from before. Also, now younger people are growing up and they've not had the heritage of church. So they don't come with that inherited interpretation of scripture that other generations have. With 24/7 news, everything's on our phone, we're seeing and exposed to the ugly side of the world far more than we have before. And I think that raises and heightens their awareness.
With regards to disability and attitudes towards disabled people, young people have a very different perspective on inclusion of disabled people, and that's primarily because they've been brought up in a generation where disability is understood more in terms of attitudes and relationships rather than as physical or mental or emotional characteristics, which was the inherited model which older people tend to go by.
So a story from like a few months ago, I was meeting up with some children's youth and families workers, and we were reflecting on how we're engaging with the LGBTQ kind of conversation. And there was a real difference in the room, but the one thing that we all had in common was that they were saying that where their young people were at was so different in their understanding as to where the rest of the church were at, and that kind of generational gap was really obvious.
Yeah, no, I would definitely share the sentiments that have already been shared by Hayley and Claire and Martin. Yeah, I think for younger people, they have more access to information. It's enhanced by the technology that they have, and in particular the social media platforms that they have at their disposal. I think it's led to a world in which, in many respects, there's lots of positive spin-off effects in terms of their understanding on prejudice and discrimination. The resurgence of Black Lives Matter, for example, in June 2020, I think was one of the largest civil rights movements and marches that we've seen in decades. However, if we compare that with the March on Washington, for example, I feel that a lot of the solutions in terms of how we're going to address some of these systemic issues are situated with what we see in older generations. The emphasis on relationships, on being able to pick up phones, not just engage in email chains and social media arguments and such. So I think it's actually a combination of both that see the change that we want to see.
It would be really interesting to hear some examples from all of you in your different contexts of where you might have observed unconscious bias, either in yourself or from others. Martin, is there anything you can think of?
Quite personal example is that as a Baptist minister, I go through the settlement process. And I first went into that 20 years ago, and my use of a wheelchair was mentioned on my profile. And it took 65 churches before I was able to settle. Some of them overtly said that they didn't want to talk to me because of the wheelchair. But in other cases, it was simply unconscious decisions that and assumptions about what a wheelchair user could and couldn't do, and also about the role of what a minister did and didn't do. Fortunately, that has changed over the years, and my most recent experience of that is far better.
Loads of what you said really resonates with me, Martin, in terms of what I've kind of seen through settlement processes, where I've been in situations where we've been like looking at profiles, and somebody might be very different to who we are. There was a Muslim who converted to Christianity, and we were like, oh no, we put a whole narrative around them and thought they can't possibly be the right settlement for us. And so we kind of said the no for them. And I really recognise how bad that is now to be doing that. And another kind of example also would be with young people, we limit them so much. And I think when I was 16, I was booking halls and doing things, putting on missions. And we're always waiting for people to grow up before they can participate in God's mission and their calling, really. And so that's a real frustration of mine.
I think I had to actually remind myself of unconscious bias, because a lot of the spaces that I've been in have moved slightly away from the conversation on unconscious bias. It was actually set by the premise of a paper that was put forward by Dr. Gabriella Beckles-Raymond, which essentially made the whole question for how much can we claim unconscious bias isn't actually conscious. And she explains it a lot better than I will, so I'll stop there. But I think that what I took away more than anything from that is that our conversations around unconscious bias, and particularly how they show up, have to be based from the premise that the issues that we're trying to address are structural. So all of the initiatives that we do around equality and inclusion, all of the different intersections that we address, be that race, gender, disability, sexuality, need to be understood from the lens that the structures, in terms of how we're set up currently, have been made to serve a few, not many, and therefore they can't be treated as an add-on. We're adding on gender, we're adding on race. What we want to do is rebuild again from a place that's actually shared by all of the people that are reflected in our congregations.
I was just wondering whether, rather than set up for the few, these structures are set up for the norm, whatever that is perceived to be, and doesn't cope with diversity and difference very well, rather than a narrow norm. So it could be the majority who fit in with the norm, which excludes the minority on the edges.
And in terms of our structures and what we think is the norm or set up in a certain way, it's fascinating that really hits the ground in our churches. So, for example, I've observed on a regular basis when new people join a church, the females always ask to join the catering rota or the refreshment team. And the kind of guys always ask, do you want to come on the walking group, or we're going to a pub? Women's breakfasts have continental breakfast, and men's breakfasts have fried breakfast. It's all those little, really small assumptions that we make, but we're taking the choice away from the individual. And I guess when we're talking about kind of younger people, they don't have that same divide, and that those small conversations really hit hard of actually, I'm being excluded. So I think it just is in every area of our church lives today.
So what does it look like when a community starts to act with greater self-awareness?
I think two things that are absolutely central are committing to a process of discomfort and decentering. So I think in all conversations around inclusion and equity and equality, we need to get comfortable with decentering ourselves. And that sometimes can feel quite powerless. So what we heard a lot over the course of Black Lives Matter is, I want to help, I just don't know how. And it can become quite a disempowering space. It can quite often lead to inaction instead of action. I think a lot of times we need to be really, really intentional as well and say, we're not just going to change how things are by sort of agreeing and nodding and sitting and not moving. We have to be very, very proactive in what we're doing.
I think that's so true. It's about living with that discomfort and being okay with that. So often we think we have to be nice and neat and packaged when we come to church, but actually allowing God to work through that mess and the questions and the confusion and the uncomfortableness that all that brings. I think at its heart, when we do this well, when we prefer each other's needs, we're doing what Jesus taught us to do. Mm-hmm. And that's the kingdom of God. When we get this right, we see a snippet of what God's kingdom is going to look like. Everyone in unity, not uniformity, but everyone in unity in Christ. And I think the fascinating thing is, how amazing would it be if we if we entered every conversation, every deacon's meeting, every worship service with who's not here? Whose voice are we not hearing? How can we make this space a safe space for people to come and be themselves and encounter God? And I think that starts with the uncomfortableness. So, yeah.
Yeah, for me, it'd be like the listening. I think young people want to be heard, but they want to make sure that other people have been heard too. There is that kind of inclusivity in who they are and how they are, and that welcoming of difference. I love the fact that young people are able to live with difference so well, and they're able to live with like a plurality of stories without any of those diminishing their own story, which I think is just really beautiful. And an example for me is that I was with a youth weekend away, and we were sat around the bonfire, and the leaders were all chatting about what church could be, should be, and all that kind of stuff. And I just turned to the young person next to me, and he was about 17, 18, and I said, "What stops your mates from engaging with church?" And he said, straight off, "If the church was more affirming, then my mates would be more interested."
I think, first of all, there's a need to recognise what's been wrong in the past to be able to move on from it. I think that has to be probably explicit. But moving on from that, we've heard about voices and valuing them and listening to them. And I'm wondering whether the fostering of what I would call covenant friendships is important here. And I think they need to have three characteristics. They need to be intentionally inclusive of others, and that means listening and valuing the others' opinions and voices. They need to be explicitly mutual, particularly in ratios of power between leadership or the body of the church and those who are on the fringes. And they need to be particular, and by being particular, I mean they need to take into account the particular context of that church or that group of people, and also the particularity of those who are involved in that friendship and covenant relationship.
Thank you so much, Hayley, Rhaea, Clare, and Martin, for sharing your thoughts with us for this session. What strikes me is that, whenever I used to be at a conference or a symposium and you'd have a panel, I used to often think it was kind of a token sort of thing, or let's get some other people to share their points of view. But I have increasingly found that getting different voices together to express an opinion or answer a question gives such a richer way of thinking about ideas and how we live. So I feel like I've learned something through this conversation already myself. So thank you very much. As usual, we have a few questions for you to consider in the light of what you've just heard.
After you've discussed these and are ready to move on, please watch our fourth video, which delves into some biblical and theological reflection.